So good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, good afternoon, professors, scholars, researchers, and participants. Uh, we are moving on to the next panel, next technical session. We shall be titled Transnational Modernities, Planetary Crisis, and New Light Rooms. I am warmly welcoming you. The session invites us to think critically about the rapidly changing realities of our contemporary world, from questions of transnational identity and mobility to ecological anxieties, technological transformations, and imagining ways of imagining life and coexistence, cohabiting and becoming in the 21st century. So I'm certain that the papers being presented here will lead to rich and engaging academic discussion and conversions. And it is now my privilege to introduce the chair of the session, Dr. Sagar Mondal, assistant professor in the Department of English at the University of Kalyani. Dr. Mondal has made significant academic contributions to his research publications, books, and scholarly engagements in contemporary literary and cultural studies. His work reflects a sustained interest in modern literary thought, spatiality, science fiction, and evolving global realities, engaging deeply with questions of mediation, urban life, and changing human existences and experiences in a transforming world. His scholarly writings, including his work on Mahatma and graphic science fiction, demonstrate a thoughtful engagement with newer critical frameworks and contemporary cultural concepts. So we are truly honored to have him chairing this intellectually stimulating session today, which is a special session with 4 participants from different parts of the world, from North Africa and UK. So as the moderator of the session, I would like to respectfully invite Dr. Sagar Mondal to take over the proceedings and guide us through the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
The session is now yours.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. And I think I'm clearly audible, because in this part of the world, we are having a bit of a technical glitch as a result of weather conditions. And I hope this session runs smoothly. And I cannot wonder, because I think the 4 papers or the 4 discussions that we are going to have are so closely allied in terms of theme and ethical dimensions. And I'm really looking forward to hear them all and take notes and engage in very interactive ways to kind of understand how they feel about the modern emerging necropolitics of our world. And I was going to the abstracts of all the papers, and I found that those were not only incisive. All of us here would listen to the papers, actively engage with the speakers. But as I was saying, the one thing that really, was visible, that, how these papers are coming together to speak truth to power in many ways. And I feel that was wonderful, because the first paper, I think, that we would be listening to would be Violence Beyond Borders. And it talks about violence, genocide, the digital platforms of expressing dissent across Palestine and West Bank. And Palestine has been something which is extremely close to my heart. In fact, my own PhD has been on the graphic mediums emerging from that part of the world. And the remaining 3 papers, and I would just not give you spoilers, because you will just notice in a moment how richly engaging, how provocative, and ethically rigorous these papers are. So I think without much ado, I would invite the first speaker of this session, and I'm really looking forward to this, Dr. Fatum Moisa. And just, can you begin with a brief introduction of yours, ma'am?
So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, before I talk about, or introduce myself, I'd like to thank the chairperson for chairing our session. I'd like also to thank all of the organizing members for their efforts, and for all those who contributed to make of this event, a reality. Thank you for the selection of such really interesting for me and timely topics. So it's Dr. Mouissa from the University of Lagbat, Algeria. And today I will be presenting a topic titled Violence Beyond Borders, the Phenomenology of Perception in the Digital Modernity. Before I present my work, allow me or give me just a few seconds to share my PowerPoint with you. And please tell me, yes, whether or not, yes, the slides are visible or they are moving or not.
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yes. Is it shared right now?
Can you see? It is. Can you just make the font size a tad bit larger?
Just 1 minute, please. Yes.
I think it is clearly visible now.
Yes. Is it visible?
It is, absolutely.
Can you see? Yes. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can. It is clearly visible.
Yes. Are the slides moving, please, before I proceed?
Yes, visible.
All right, yeah, so I'm sharing with you my talk map that includes interaction, in which I'm going, yes, to introduce my problematic, and then we're going to have some theoretical claims, or mainly the philosopher that I have relied on in today's presentation, and then we are going to see violence as a structure of being in relation to the Palestinian case, and then finally we're going to see the phenomenology of violence in Gaza, and then we are going to move directly to the concluding statements. So contemporary forms of violence and political struggles within the context of the 21st century have drastically transformed as physical confrontations are mediated today through images and testimonies that are mediated directly. So the phenomenological nature of war is recently mediated through digital networks that facilitated the visibility of political contestations. The Palestinian case that I have considered today as an emblem of how violence is perceived and viewed within the global structures. The social media platforms and live streaming technologies have renovated how forms of violence are perceived and politically debated and even interpreted throughout the world. The objective of this research is to trace the contradictions of modernity. This is the thing that I'm going to focus on, right? Because we all know that that modernity, it facilitates and eases connectivity on the one hand, but on the other hand, it reinforces surveillance that are subject again to asymmetrical powers on the other hand. What the research addresses is the extent to which media can be considered as a neutral instrument of representation only, or could it be an extension of perceptions and ideologies that actively shape and structure our reality, and also it alters and impacts the way we see the world around. The main hypothesis or the paper argues at the very beginning that digital media have radically transformed Palestine, which is the case that I have selected, into a contested phenomenological space in which contending narratives of victimhood, resistance, and suffering collide. And probably violence is no longer depends on institutional state narratives as previously, but they are fashioned through digital networks that allow individuals directly to eyewitness what is going on. And certainly these forms of democratized visibility are not free from power relations as assumed or predicted. To understand, the thing that I am saying, or the argument that structure my paper, I'd like, first of all, yes, to provide you with some theoretical insights vis-a-vis the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, because we need, in fact, his perception to understand this transformation, because he simply provides us with a productive ground for understanding the shift of violence within the digital era. And unlike the traditional views that operate or that intentionally separate or detach the mind from the body, so Merleau-Ponty theorizes perception as embodied engagement within the world. And in this context, the professor Andy Clark, she said that in order to understand, who is a philosopher, and the director of cognitive science at the University of Indiana, so she predicts that we live in an age of telepresence and virtual reality. The sciences of the mind are finally paying head to the centrality of body and the word, and everything around us drives home to the intimacy of perception action, and thought. So she also again confirmed that there is no need to detach or separate perception from the real action and thoughts. In order, in fact, to understand, Marlowe's philosophy, I have selected, or I have focused initially on 3 main points, because I couldn't really tackle, all of the essential, ideas he tackled in his book, The Phenomenology of Perception, originally published in 1941 and translated in 2013. So I will focus only on 3 points that are really critical to proceed with today's, topic that I have selected. The main idea is Marlowe's Ponty and perception to the corporeal schema. So for Merleau-Ponty, to be a body is to be tied to a certain word. And this is the thing that is considered as shocking to the humanity, in the sense that he claimed that our body is not initially in space, but it is a part of that space. For instance, as an example, you do not need to measure the distance between you and the book, for instance, that you desire to read. And you do not really measure, the distance between you probably and your cup of tea or cup of coffee, or even you do not look at your feet, in order to walk. But your body knows how to do that automatically. So hence, we do not really translate the data of touch into the language of seeing and vice versa. So we do not really bring together one by one of the parts of our bodies, but this translation is at once performed for all within us. They are the body itself. So accordingly, to summarize this idea, so the body is not really a machine we steer around, and it's not really an object in the world, but the body is our very anchor to reality. So it is the body subject. Another also interesting point that Marlowe developed is his critical and fundamental critique to perception. So for him, perception is not really a passive process, but it is an active dialogue between your body and the world around. So before we think about the world, logically speaking, we experience it bodily. And in this view, we never see, we are not really allowed, to see all sides at once, but we understand the process as a whole. So for Merleau-Ponty, he in fact transforms the very definition of what does it really mean to understand something, in the sense that he surface of reality. For instance, in the traditional philosophy and objective science, we rely on the intellection, as shown here in my slides, right? So we do not really go deeper into deeper level, but we just rely on the intellection, which is considered as, yes, the surface level. Whereas, for this philosopher, phenomenology should dig down into the origins of issues, or how things actually come, yes, to happen, and so that they have come to mean something to us. So in this sense, the traditional view, when it comes, I'm going to give another example, to the historical happenings. So he said that generally speaking, or in the traditional and conventional view, historians, they focus only on the mass of historical facts. For instance, they focus on dates, causality, how laws are being passed or initiated, how people reacted, and etc. But for this philosopher, he said that to truly understand and comprehend something is to grasp its total intention. What do I mean by total intention here? We mean grasping its unique mode of existence. For sure here, going back to the historian, some historians, they should not really memorize a timeline of facts. They shouldn't really record dates and events only, but we need to understand an event, or to understand, such kind of an event or a revolution, we must grasp its total intention, i.e. we should tackle the atmosphere, we should see the sudden shift in how human beings look at each other. Here we should focus on both parts, not only one. Like, for instance, the Palestinians and the other part, the collective impetus even, and the lived crisis of that historical moment. So what, in fact, probably Merleau-Ponty wants to claim is that human beings are condemned to meaning. We cannot escape expressing who we are, because every single thing we do, or every single act, is a manifestation of our style of being a part of this world. And he, I'm going to quote him directly. He said, just a short quote that summarizes the idea that I have mentioned before. He said that there is not a human word, not a justa, even one which is the outcome of a habit or absent-mindedness, which has not some meaning. Another point, in fact, that he based on this conception that he develops is the structural web of being, in the sense that he said that we shall find the same structure of being that are underlying for instance, anything a human does emits and rotates from their bodily experience in the world. The way a certain society acts, practices its religion, negotiates its own culture, revolts even, and runs its own affairs or runs its own government. So these are not really random issues or separate things, but they are all different branches of the same tree. And if you look closely at any one of us, for instance, you will find the exact same core attitude vis-a-vis life, and if not to say vis-a-vis the world around us. So for this philosopher, understanding a doctrine, for instance, means understanding it from different perspectives, from different angles simultaneously, and everything has a meaning, and we shall find this same structure of being that's the structure of human relations. In order, I mean, to go back or to move directly to the case study. So the first point I'm going to cover is violence as a structure of being, applying the idea of Merleau-Ponty's. So the contemporary crisis in Gaza transcends the uneven and reductionist models of traditional geopolitics, which frequently detach the conflict into isolated economic, psychological, or ideological views. And adopting, Ponty's view, one comes to realize that there are, in fact, different cultural and political doctrines that are fundamental to understand, the Palestinian problem. And within the context of Gaza, violence dismisses to be a recurrent series of geopolitical events, and instead they harden into a totalized and self-perpetuating existential structure. Hence, we are not really dealing with a dialectical crisis of lived experience of Palestinians only, but we are dealing with different doctrines that are structuring such kind of conflict. And to do so, we need to return, yes, to the origin of this crisis. We need also to tackle the psychological trauma and the economic blockages that are practiced, and even the political rhetorics that are behind this structure of being. And based on the idea of Marlowe's phenomenology, so it's really interesting, it's really crucial to resist the fatalistic trap of treating the conflict as an inevitable or something that is a law of nature, someone who lost the land and another who is trying yes. So that we need yes, total exposure of how this system really functions and works. And every current event is both a symptom of accumulated historical sequences. And in order to understand this, I'm going to give short examples and brief examples concerning the events of the Nakba that happened in 1948, where the Palestinians were expelled from the land. And that it was followed a few years later by a war of 6 days that is called the Naksa, to liberate the lands, and then to understand later on, yes, the problems that happened with the Palestinians. So the Palestinian struggle, in fact, presents a central topic mainly recently in the last few years with regards to politics, space, and even visibility that was not really granted to all of us. And because simply the mainstream media institutions very often frame Palestinians through the dominant geopolitical narratives that tend to marginalize the Palestinian voices. However, with the emergence of the social media, right, this has been changed, right? Because simply social media disrupted these representational hierarchies. Platforms such as Instagram, as you have seen lately, and use of bombings and displacement, destruction, and mourning circulate globally without requiring approval or mediation by the institutional quarters that are generally governed by, yes, the Western powers. The smartphone nowadays becomes both a witness and a weapon, enabling individuals to contest official narratives through immediate visual testimony. For sure, this transformation has significant phenomenological implications. As you can see here, some statistics of truth about the TikTok and hashtags that document during the Israeli-Hamas war. That happened, yes, just lately. And we have to know that the transformation, this kind of transformation has significant phenomenological implications, because simply the digital technologies alter the relationship between the witness and the event. We as observers and what was going on, yes, in Palestine or the Palestinians in Gaza. We as viewers are no longer, we do not encounter violence only through newspapers or news reports. Instead, we experience events in real time. Live streams from Gaza create forms of mediated immediacy that crosses the geographical and even temporal borders. And in this sense, I'd like to refer to the professor who is specialized in media. She wrote a work, Weaponization of Victimhood. She said, Lily Shuliaraki, who argues that contemporary humanitarian communication increasingly relies on effective publics, in which emotional responses generated through digital media, they foster and they encourage political identification and ethical even engagement across geographical boundaries. Images, as we have seen lately, and testimonies emerging from Gaza, for instance, they circulate rapidly across digital networks, producing forms of emotional proximity that we were not really granted and were not allowed, to have. But at the same time, it destabilized the distance that was traditionally separating the audience from the sites of violence. And online, we as online audience, we are transformed into active agents within this transnational networks of solidarity, activism, and political discourse. Through the diffusion of hashtags, digital campaigns, and visual content, effective and political responses are mobilized across geopolitical boundaries. And consequently, the Palestinian struggle becomes increasingly decentered, operating simultaneously within material realities and digitally mediated spaces. Therefore, the Palestinian resistance is no longer confined to the occupied territory that is Palestine, but it exists within digital spaces where narratives and even memories and testimonies are progressively reproduced and contested. It is also worth noting at this level that the same platforms that enable us to see what is going on, also they commodify attention, unfortunately, because we all know that the algorithms, they prioritize and they favor engagement and often amplifying emotionally charged content while reducing complex political realities into mere consumable fragments or data. This process contributes to what Gay Depot famously theorized as a society of spectacle, in which the social reality becomes mediated through images that are consumed rather than being critically engaged with or dealt with. And within this culture and within this context, right, suffering itself transformed into visual content only that is mediated, to be circulated via the digital platforms. And graphic images, emotional testimonies, and scenes of destruction, they often gain visibility precisely because they produce effective shock to the viewers or those who are observing, yet the rapid, unfortunately, consumption may detach them from their broader political and historical context. And in this sense, probably violence risks becoming incorporated into what is considered as the spectatorship of suffering, where the distant audience, we as viewers, we encounter trauma through the mediated forms that oscillate between empathy and consumption at the same time. Moving on to the last point that I want us to highlight, which is the phenomenology of violence in Gaza. So the phenomenology of violence in Gaza concerns not only the occurrence of violence itself or per se, but also how violence is perceived, conceived, and interpreted or dealt with within lived reality. So in Gaza, violence permeates everyday existence through military occupation, displacement, bombardment, surveillance, and restriction of movement. Yet within the digital modernity, these experiences are increasingly circulated through the global networks of representation, as I have said before. But however, the lived experience of violence in Palestine cannot be just reduced to statistical abstraction on the basis that phenomenology emphasized on the embodied dimensions of suffering, such as fear, weakness, uncertainty, grief, and spatial confinement. And we have seen that the daily life becomes of the Palestinians, right, becomes organized around randomness, where ordinary routines and acts coexist with constant possibilities of destruction. And the body experiences for the Palestinians, going back to the idea of the philosopher, so it does not, their bodies, they experience nowadays the space not as a secure environment, but rather as a perilous and dangerous terrain. The digital media, as I have mentioned before, extend these experiences beyond the local boundaries, and video records during attacks transmit embodied fear to global audiences. And the shaken cameras, like we have seen directly, the screams, the collapsing buildings, and the interrupted communications produce effective forms of witnessing that we were not really allowed or granted to. The phenomenology offers particularly valuable framework for understanding how the digital media transforms the political suffering into a shared global experiential condition. So rather than perceiving violence as a distant external event that is going on in Gaza only within a certain geographical, confined space, it emphasizes the ways in which suffering is lived and perceived by us as those who are distant and watching from afar, and embodied through our consciousness. So referring to Mauro Ponti's conception of embodied perception, the digital networks reshape the censoring and effective relationship between the audience and the sites of violence by challenging the traditional distances established between the observer and the observed. Through the live streams and the smartphone photos and images and real-time testimonies that are circulated across social media platforms, we as the part of the audience do not merely witness violence intellectually, but we encounter it phenomenologically speaking as an immersive and emotionally charged experience that penetrates everyday or our everyday consciousness. Palestinian suffering, for example, becomes integrated into the temporal rhythms of our daily digital life, appearing regularly within personal feeds, notifications, and mediated interactions. So in this context, violence does not function exclusively as an external geographical and geopolitical reality, but instead, or rather, it emerges as a perpetual condition that is structuring our collective emotional awareness across the transnational publics. In order to, or to conclude my presentation, I want simply to say that the transformation of violence within the digital modernity requires a critical reconsideration of how contemporary conflicts are perceived, experienced, and lived, and even politically charged or interpreted. The Palestinian struggle reveals that war and suffering are no longer confined to territorial and geographical spaces only, but they are increasingly constituted within global media networks that challenge the spatial and temporal boundaries. Through the phenomenological framework of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, this paper has argued that digital media function not merely as channels of representation, which is that was my question or interrogation at the very beginning of my presentation, in which I said that can we consider social media as a neutral instrument that is used only for representation, or probably it could, yes, yes, represent certain hidden ideologies. So here, based on the case studies that I have selected, I have arrived at the conclusion that the digital media function not as a channel of representation, but as an extensions of perceptions and ideologies that shape our world and structure the way we see the world around us. So violence in general becomes globally apprehended through mediated forms of witnessing that recognize relationships between immediacy, and distance, presence and absence, witness and audience, the observer and the observed. And allow me to share with you the different references that I have relied on in today's presentation. And this is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I would be more than delighted, yes, to answer all of your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Moussa. And it's such a beautiful deliberation on a very, very difficult topic, I must say, because, you know, you have talked about the philosophy and the structure of violence and how a digital discipline in terms of digital platforms, whether Instagram, where it is through mobile networks, tries to explore the lived reality of the Palestinians. And, you know, as I was talking in the beginning of this session, that this is a topic that is very, very close to my heart. I have worked on it for a few years, and I still find it very difficult, you know, to impose some kind of an understanding, because the violence in the West Bank or the Gaza is so relentlessly evolving. And at the end of your paper, you really, you know, recognize the fact whether we play into the hands of this politics of spectacle. And it invites so much thought. And let us take the questions at the end of all the papers. I think I have a few of my questions as well. So, because this is indeed a very difficult topic. It's, you know, the lived reality of the Palestinians, you know, representational monopoly, and as you say, the attempt to break that monopoly through digital networks. So does, you know, an attempt to break that monopoly creates a different kind of a monopoly, a monopoly of indigenous others, which equally remains opaque or non-accessible. That is a risk we take when we are talking about exoticizing violence. I am not very keen on the word exoticizing, but let's see what kind of, you know, rich interactions await us in the next 30 minutes. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Huria Agabu. And what could be better than talking about non-synchronized modernities? Because it seems that as if this paper is working into the next. So please, the stage is yours, Professor.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Huria Agabu from Algeria, and I'm very delighted to take part in your conference, highly informative and insightful topics that have been discussed from early morning in Algeria. We are already in the afternoon in India. So yes, it's I warmly welcome you to my presentation, all distinguished scholars, researchers, and professors. Let me just share my screen and check if it is visible. Yes. Are my screen, are my slides visible?
Yes, the slides are visible. Yes, the
Are they
presentation is
visible?
visible.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Just a minute. So my presentation is entitled Deferred Emancipation and Uneven Temporalities, African American Literature and the Racial Disruption of American Modernities Chronology. So the history of American modernity is often presented as a story of industrial progress, technological innovation, urban development, and democratic expansion. Such a narrative suggests that modernization was a unified national experience equally shared by all Americans. However, the condition of African Americans during the modern era reveals the deeply uneven character of this modernity. While the United States celebrated itself as a modern democratic nation, Black Americans continued to endure all forms of segregation, racial violence, economic exploitation, and political exclusion, even after the official abolition of slavery. So for African Americans, emancipation remained incomplete and deferred, rather, as freedom did not translate into full citizenship or social equality. African American literature exposes these paradoxes and discrepancies by demonstrating that Black communities experienced a highly different temporality of modernity, one marked not by progress and inclusion, but by interruption, marginalization, alienation, and historical persistence of all forms of oppression. So through the examination of works by W.E.B. Du Bois, Richard Wright, and Toni Morrison, and many others, the illusion of a homogeneous African modernity is rather dismantled, revealing instead a nation shaped by coexisting and an equal modern experience. So, abolition did not guarantee full civic inclusion or equality. The end of the Civil War and the Reconstruction Act of 1867 constituted a new phase in the history and condition of African American community. For the first time, education, although segregated, became a right for all African Americans. But despite this legal reality, African Americans were obliged to work for survival, and only a minority of them received an elementary education. Despite the achievements of some progress on the economic and political levels around the 1880s, further obstacles hindered the social advancement of Black people. So the Ku Klux Klan, which is a very famous racist organization, eroded all hope for freedom and equality. Moreover, violence through lynchings and the legalized segregation enabled by the Jim Crow laws were sources of more fear and suffering among the newly freed Blacks. Consequently, the African American literature written between 1865 and 1920 voiced the disillusionment, fears, and frustrations caused by the country's failure to keep its promise of freedom and equality after the Civil War. So this discontent is expressed in many literary works, in biographies and autobiographies, such as Frederick Douglass' narratives of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, and Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery. Black women also took very active participation in the portrayal of this deferred modernity, like Anna Julia Cooper, Frances Ellen Watkins, Harper, and many others, okay, who wrote ex-slave narratives, novels, essays, poetry, and drama as well. Other male writers emerged on the African-American literary scene, distinguishing themselves by well-crafted short stories just after the slave narratives, novels, and poetry. These include Charles W. Chestnut, author of The House Behind the Cedars, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, whose novel The Uncalled and The President's Daughter as well, okay, were very, very eminent writers. Their works tackle the complexities of race, identity, social exclusion in post-Reconstruction America. It explores the phenomenon of racial passing, showing how light-skinned African Americans or mulattoes attempted to cross the color line in order to gain access to the privileges reserved for white society, hypocritically celebrating modernity. So portraying very, very deep existential dilemmas with the issues related to identity and identity formation. So despite growing interest in writing literature, the works produced by these writers were unfortunately ignored by white critics. Now, the period of migration and war and the Harlem Renaissance are really landmarks in the literary history of African American literature. So the Harlem Renaissance is a crucial part in the history of African American literature. Two major events are associated with its beginning. It's the Great Migration, which started in 1950, and the end of the First World War in 1980. So the Great Migration was characterized by a flux of hundreds of thousands of African Americans moving from the rural South to the urban North in search of better opportunities, jobs, and the promise of a better life in such large cities as Chicago and New York. However, African Americans were also enrolled as soldiers in the American Army to take part in the First World War for the sake of freedom and democracy. Their experiences in Europe contributed to increase their awareness of American racial prejudice against them. So further disillusionment was experienced by the soldiers returning home only to face racism and poverty. As a result, they felt that the best weapon against racism was to take pride in and preserve their identity. And this is what we see in works published during the Harlem Renaissance. Coined by Alan Locke, a Black philosopher and writer, the Harlem Renaissance, which literally means rebirth, was in fact the first opportunity African Americans had to give birth and celebrate the uniqueness of their culture, and most importantly, to voice their condition. Aspects of their literary trends include a break with the restraints of the Victorian age and an eagerness to join the boldness of the Roaring Twenties, with Harlem being the artistic and cultural center where the new generation of educated Black writers met and exchanged ideas. On those occasions, some critics argued that African American literature should uplift the race, suggesting that its people should appear in a more positive light. The younger among them felt that a realistic view of African American life was preferable for the sake of art. New York City provided these African-American intellectuals with publishing facilities during the Harlem Renaissance, enabling them to emerge on the American literary scene. In addition to these publishing companies, several agencies had magazines that sponsored writing contests and published works by young Black writers. Two major periodicals of the time were The Crisis, published by the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People, edited by Du Bois, and Opportunity, published by the Union League and edited by Charles S. Johnson. Other independent magazines, such as The Messenger, opened its pages to African American writers. So the very famous figures of the Harlem Renaissance, as Zora Neale Hurston, Wallace Sturman, Langston Hughes, and many others, tried to launch their own literary magazine called Fire. So this latter lasted only one issue in November 1926. With the Harlem Renaissance, many young African-American writers came to prominence with such names as Claude McKay and Countee Cullen and Langston Hughes. Many others, including James Weldon Johnson and Dorothy West, were recognized for their poetical works, short stories, and plays. Now, a special emphasis will be put on Du Bois because he highly contributed in voicing the existential dilemmas African Americans were experiencing, especially with his concepts of double consciousness. So Du Bois re-entered the literary scene by continuing the work he had begun at the beginning of the century by producing books and essays on the position of African Americans in the USA and the struggle they should carry to achieve equality and to achieve modernity. So with his major achievements, the souls of Black folks early in the century, he voiced his deep concern with the condition of Black people in America, pointing to the legacy of slavery and racism, which left them in a perpetual crisis with their sense of self completely marginalized from what is called modernity. So his concept of double consciousness raised fundamental questions about the dilemmas experienced by African Americans who were forced to see themselves through two conflicting lenses, their own self-perception and the demeaning gaze of a racist white society. So this two-ness, as Du Bois calls it, produces a fractured identity in which Black individuals are constantly negotiating between selfhood and social degradation. His writings become both diagnosis and testimony because they explain racial inequality while also making Black interior life audible within a national discourse that frequently ignored it. So, as a conclusion to this important period in the life of African American literature, the Harlem Renaissance oscillated between conservative writers who supported the idea of uplifting the race by a positive treatment of the issue of the Black people, and the more radical writers who insisted on a realistic portrayal of their fellow. And in here, we cannot, not mentioning Richard Wright, with Black Boy and Native Son. Both were able, both stances were able to express their views as offering American and the world a view that their culture was worth the literary theme, a beautiful culture, a topic that came to life again during the Black Panther movement of the mid-1960s and early 70s. So now moving a little bit to the next period, which was the period of the Great Depression, which also was a marking period in the history of African American literature with the economic crisis and the market crash, leading to unprecedented world economic crisis. The already precarious condition of the African American worsened, with the double victimization of both the universal problem of the Great Depression and also racism. They were the last hired and the first fired. Famous African-American writers of that era, such Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, were involved in the Federal Writers Project, earning a living while continuing to write. So this period was also marked by the emergence of a new African-American, voices, including Richard Wright and Margaret Walker. With his protest novel, Native Son, Richard Wright established himself as a major writer or spokesman for African Americans, denouncing the conditions under the African American in the urban North. So one of the most important voices was Richard Wright with his novel, and with he emerged as both a novelist, a poet, an essayist. He tackled racial injustice with uncompromising realism, especially in his novel Native Son, which marked a turning point in African American literature. The story of its protagonist, Bigger Thomas, a young black man trapped in a world defined by poverty, racism, fear, and captured the rage and desperation that many African Americans felt in the face of systemic oppression. The novel or the novel's release was a publishing sensation. It sold more than 250,000 copies within 3 weeks. So Native Son was more than achieve, or yet Native Son did more than achieve commercial success. It delivered a searching indictment of a society that creates the very condition it then paradoxically punishes. Wright understood that the emotional response his work provoked would be really controversial. So after the publication of his earlier book, Uncle Tom's Children, he reflected, I had made an awfully naive mistake. I found that I had written a book which even bankers' daughters could read and weep over and feel good about. I swore to myself that if I ever wrote another book, no one would weep over it. And this was the case after all. So through the character of Bigger Thomas, Wright presents a black man trapped within the oppressive structures of modern Chicago. He lives in a technologically advanced and highly industrialized city, yet he is denied access to the freedoms and opportunities that supposedly define modern democratic America. His life was rather confined by racial segregation and economic exploitation and constant surveillance. So this contradiction exposes the deferred nature of modernity for African Americans. They inhabit modern spaces, but without fully participating in modern citizenship or social progress. So the urban space in the novel further reinforces deferred modernity. Chicago symbolizing industrial modern America, but for Bigger, it becomes rather a landscape of confinement rather than liberation. So Wright, therefore, transforms the modern city into a symbol of racial inequality and uneven development by stressing the discrepancy between the opposed worlds of the Daltons, the capitalists in the city, and the Thomases. The condition of the doubly deportized Black females in Native Son, more particularly, is further evidence of an uneven condition of American citizens. Black female characters, such as Bigger's mother and his girlfriend, Bessie Mears, embody the harsh realities of poverty and marginalization. Bigger's mother represented the struggle for survival with oppressive economic conditions. She is completely powerless against the racial and social structures that confine her family to extreme poverty, reflecting the limited opportunities available for the Black community. Bessie Mears, on the other hand, symbolizes the vulnerability of Black women in a racist and patriarchal society. She is exhausted by labor, poverty, and emotional despair, often turning to alcohol as an escape from her difficult reality. So, and the discrepancies between Mary Dalton and Bessie Mears were highly visible to bring insightful or to portray deeply the deferred modernity in the novel. So the characters in Native Son were not merely narrative agents, but ideological constructs, where Wright deliberately limits their interiority or emotional nuance in favor of a larger social argument that race, class, and power shape not only individual lives, but also the way literature represents those lives. Langston Hughes also was an eminent writer who successfully portrayed these deferred dreams, especially in his very, very famous poem Harlem, A Dream Deferred, 1950. This poem powerfully interrogates the consequences of postponed freedom, and delayed social progress for African Americans in the 20th century America. Written in the context of persistent racial segregation and structural inequality, the poem becomes a poetic meditation on what it means to be excluded from the promises of modernity. So, through a series of haunting rhetorical questions, transforms a dream of equality into a fragile, deteriorating object, suggesting that postponement does not preserve hope, but instead intensifies social and psychological pressures. So in this sense, the poem exposes modernity in the United States as uneven and racially stratified, where the benefits of progress are systematically withheld from Black communities, producing rather frustration, volatility, and potential rupture. So, let's move to another example, a very, very beautiful poem entitled Ballad of Birmingham by Dudley Randall, where he portrays the dramatic end of young girls taking part in a manifestation and ending in a very tragic end. So this poem illustrates how African Americans were excluded from the promises of modern democratic society despite the discourse of progress. So the poem presents modernity as deferred because Black citizens could not enjoy the basic freedoms associated with modern life, like safety, mobility, childhood innocence, and full civic participation. So the poetic voice or the person of the poem, who is a mother, so the mother's refusal to let her daughter join the Freedom March reveals the constant presence of racial terror in Black life. Public spaces, which should symbolize democratic freedom, becomes a site of danger and exclusion. Even the church, okay, so the church bombing exposes the contradiction at the heart of American modernity. While the nation promoted itself as modern and democratic, African Americans continued to face segregation and violence. The church itself symbolizes hope, spirituality, and communal protection. However, even this a sacred space is destroyed by racist violence, showing that Black communities remain vulnerable within the so-called modern nation. So, Toni Morrison also is one of the most eminent writers who prioritized issues of race, and gender in all her literary works, especially with the novel Beloved. She is a Nobel Prize winner. So Beloved powerfully shows that the formal end of slavery did not grant African Americans immediate access to freedom, equality within modern American society. She rather uses another dimension of time. She shows that temporality, as we know it in universal terms, is rather transcended for more complex perceptions of time. She challenges the dominant narrative of American modern progress by revealing that Black Americans remained trapped within the psychological and social consequences of slavery long after emancipation. through her protagonist Seta. So Seta's life embodies the exclusion from modern citizenship because although she was legally free, she remained psychologically imprisoned by memories of enslavement, violence, and loss. Her inability to separate the past from the present suggests that African Americans were denied the possibility of a new beginning, usually associated with modern freedom. The ghost of beloved symbolizes the persistence of historical trauma and the return of a repressed past. So rather than remaining behind, slavery continually intrudes into the present, demonstrating that modernity for African Americans is haunted and incomplete. So time in the novel is rather fragmented and cyclical rather than linear. Morrison rejects the conventional model idea of historical progress by showing that traumatic memory collapses distinctions between past and present, and this disrupted temporality reflects how Black communities could not fully move forward while the violence of slavery remained unresolved. So in Beloved, Morrison divulges the atrocity of sexual assault Black females experienced on slave ships in a counter-narrative that voices their mutilated bodies and souls. So by giving voice to the different characters in Beloved, Morrison disrupts the colonial discourse of the white hegemony by allowing each character to speak out his own version of his history and its legacy. So to conclude, this presentation has demonstrated, I guess, that African American literature profoundly challenges the idea of a unified and progressive American modernity. Through the works of eminent Black writers, we observe that African Americans experienced modernity as fragmented, delayed, and deeply unequal. With America celebrated industrial progress, democracy, and freedom, Black communities continued to face segregation, racial violence, and marginalization, and more importantly, the enduring trauma of slavery. So African American writers expose the contradiction between the nation's modern ideals and the lived reality of Black Americans, revealing that emancipation did not automatically lead to equality or full citizenship. So African American literature redefines modernity, not as a universal experience of progress, but as a contested and racialized process shaped by exclusion, resistance, memory, and the ongoing struggle for dignity and recognition. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Agbu. I think, again, this is a very richly invested paper. And I have questions, and I'm sure the people who are attending and listening to this conference, to this beautiful paper, surely have a few, more than a few, I guess. And, you know, the interior life of the African American, I think it's a very murky territory to navigate. And sometimes I do wonder that when people who are facing necropolitics and who have been put under surveillance, relentless surveillance as such, and they're facing exclusions in all fronts of life, the kind of modernity they hope to aspire to, does that kind of modernity after a period become bellicose or aggressive? So I am trying to form a nourished modernity of my own, which would directly challenge, or if not challenge, at least talk about my own life, talk about my own roots. Does that idea of modernity, which is my own cultural preserve, and which is also my agency and strategy to survive? You are talking about the text Beloved, so I am again kind of recalled to that sense of appropriation of something I must have. So I was wondering, and I feel that nowadays, and this is a very much of a personal opinion, that this kind of appropriation, and I'm not very happy with the word as I use it, appropriation or use of use of rootedness or a sense of belonging can, at times, after so many years, can sense a bit militant. I leave it to you to answer this at the end of the session. So, I don't know whether the African American is merely fighting for survival. Maybe we have to look at him in a different way, or her in a different way. Maybe he is now a powerhouse of lot of strength, lot of endurance. He has to teach us a lot about how to endure, survive, and even dominate. And I think he doesn't want to be kind of labeled into that category of the victim anymore. Maybe I think you are the best persons to answer these. I am just keeping these questions for you and for the audience. And thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful paper, Professor. Okay, now we move on to the next paper. Wonderful listening to it. Both the papers as of now. Now we would go on to the next paper, and I would warmly invite Professor Iman to speak on French colonial ecocide. And again, this paper has this context of the crisis of modernity, and they have been pulled together so nicely. And I am really, really hoping to hear from you. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished colleagues, researchers, and fellow scholars. Okay, I would like to warmly extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this conference, Transnational Modernities, Perspectives of the Planetary, for bringing together such a valuable, such an interesting, and for investing at such a timely and overdue topic or conference theme. Thank you so much for this valuable opportunity. So thinking through the planetary reminds us again, okay, that there are so many unfinished projects, that literature and history are never really isolated, but thinking through the planetary, we come to realize that the Earth, violence, and that there are so many shared human and non-human futures to be attained, okay, once we think outside of the box or differently, as has already been tackled by one of the presenters earlier. My paper kind of aligns with his thoughts about non-human lives or the afterlives of colonialism. So let me first share my screen with you. Okay, let me know if it's visible, and then we will proceed with the elaboration. Right. Are my slides visible?
Yes, they have come on and they're visible.
Okay, thank you so much. So my contribution is entitled Wounded Landscapes, Non-Human Afterlives, French Colonial Ecocide and the Planetary Crisis of Modernity in Algerian Literature. So for far too long, the violence of French colonialism in Algeria has been measured almost exclusively through human statistics, the number of martyrs, the massacres, the imprisonments, the tortured bodies. While these losses remain sacred and undeniable, reducing colonial violence to the human alone risks obscuring another vast terrain of destructive violence, okay? The violated and raped land itself. Algeria was not merely occupied, it was ecologically wounded, geologically rewritten, and atmospherically contaminated. Colonial, and I believe the same applies for India, okay, having had this shared experience of colonialism, which did not simply stop at the threshold of the human body. It penetrated forests, orchards, deserts, soil, air, and even the radioactive particles that continue to circulate long after formal independence has been achieved. So today, and it's a very sad thing to admit, one still hears the deeply troubling and indeed vexing
assertion. I'm not certain if it's the same in India. You'll have to tell me later on about it. It's a repeated kind of assertion or phrase, sometimes even within supposedly intellectual and elite circles, that most of our infrastructure, that is to say the architectural infrastructure in Algeria, was built by France, as though colonial modernity was a benevolent civilizing gift bestowed upon empty land. Such statements paradoxically forget that colonial infrastructure was never designed for Algerian flourishing, but for extraction. It was designed for surveillance, for military domination and settler expansion. To ignore the number of tactics that France has adopted in Algeria, to name just a few: the scorched villages and forests, the confiscated lands, destroyed ecosystems, and radioactive desert laboratories that accompanied colonial modernity. I speak about modernity with reservation here, is to reproduce the very epistemology of empire that this presentation seeks to reverse. So this contribution hopefully argues that the tactics of colonial control adopted by France and all imperial systems by extension were never temporary mechanisms that vanished with independence. Ecocide does not simply disappear when flags change. It radiates, it survives in poisoned lands and wells, in damaged ecologies, militarized spatial arrangements, and in the lingering environmental afterlives of nuclear colonialism in the Sahara. The French colonial project wrote itself not only onto Algerian history and Algerian bodies, it also wrote itself into the very fabric of Algerian geography and the atmosphere. So I'll move here to the first slide. By way of introduction, I would like to say that colonialism was an environmental project just as much as it was a project designed for raping lives. Okay, so the central argument of my presentation is that Algerian literature preserves the memory of colonial ecological destruction as a counter archive of the environmental evidence, and that colonial and ecological destruction, and it reveals environmental foundations of European modernity. The land itself became an archive of imperial violence. So colonialism was not only political, nor just a military project, it was an environmental and geological undertaking as well. Probably French colonialism was the most brutal in its tactics, okay, compared to the other imperial and colonial settlements, all right? So in Algeria, there have been forests transformed, villages, deserts, water systems, and even the atmosphere, okay? Algeria became a laboratory of imperial modernity, so to speak, where techniques of domination were tested, refined, and exported across the colonial world. This presentation argues that the ecological dimensions of French colonial rule in Algeria cannot be separated from its political and military dimensions. It's a fallacy that we need to stop doing. Even as Algerians, we need to stop simply focusing on human casualties. We also need to tackle the other dimension because we are still living with its consequences. So environmental destruction was not incidental. It was constitutive of colonial domination itself. So this paper, okay, presents forth these guiding research questions. The first one is, how did French colonialism reshape Algerian landscapes materially and ecologically? And with what lasting consequences for land, water, and biodiversity? The second one, in what ways can colonialism be understood as ecocide, a systematic destruction of ecosystems integral to the logic of imperial domination? How does Algerian literature archive environmental violence, and what forms does this archival function take across genres and generations? So, Crowded literary representations of damaged land challenge Eurocentric narratives of progress, development, and modernity that are so much hailed. And then what are the non-human or beyond anthropocentric afterlives of colonial occupation? Does ecological violence persist beyond the formal end of empire? A number of conceptual and theoretical frameworks can be marshaled in order to touch upon these or to answer these put forward questions. We have environmental humanities that attempt to connect ecology, history, politics, and culture, and examine the relationship between power and the environment. They provide an interdisciplinary lens through which colonial ecological violence can be read across textual and material archives. Needless to say, decolonial theory proves to be very fit and useful because it challenges Eurocentric understandings of history and modernity and reveals that colonialism was not only a historical aberration, but a constitutive of modernity itself, its violence embedded in the very structures of the modern world. Eco-criticism also proves to be very fruitful because it studies representations of nature and environment in literature. It enables close readings of how Algerian texts encode ecological trauma, landscape memory, and mnemonic experiences in general, and the consequences of colonial occupation, especially the non-human ones. And then, as has already been mentioned by one of my fellow colleagues earlier, okay, Rob Nixon's very insightful notion of slow or theory of slow violence, which says that destruction is never a finished project, okay, that is instantaneous, but that it is gradual, it is attritional, camouflaged sometimes, and out of sight, but that it unfolds incrementally across vast time scales and geographies. So all of these, okay, prove to be powerful, okay, for our case study of Algerian ecocide. So the colonial ecocide, I would like to shed light here on some of the techniques, okay, that have been inscribed upon Algerian earth, Algerian soil and atmosphere. So French colonialism did not only dominate people, it inscribed itself into the land. Colonization altered forests, agriculture, water systems, deserts, and entire ecosystems. Empire became materially embedded within soil, rock, radiation, and atmosphere, and thus, okay, colonial modernity operated itself geologically just as much as it did militarily. So environmental destruction was not accidental. Scorched earth campaigns, deforestation, forced agricultural restructuring, land confiscation, desert militarization were central strategies of colonial domination. Even the very if you could say, a shape of architecture which has been imposed upon some of the larger cities in Algeria were done so, okay, for reasons of surveillance, okay, not for reasons of modernizing, okay, the Algerian so to speak, landscapes. So the consequences were catastrophic. Ecological collapse happened, rural dispossession was in the picture, famine, displacement, and the destruction of traditional environmental relations. All of these are duly archived, okay, in Algerian literature, which repeatedly returns to barren villages, ruined orchards, and abandoned rural spaces. So these landscapes become archives of violence and mnemonic reminders of the brutal atrocities that have been committed in Algeria. So to speak, one of the technologies, okay, that French colonialism has adopted in Algeria, it is very known as the fire or scorched land technology, okay? So colonial fire regimes, French military campaigns deployed mass burning of villages, destruction of crops, deliberate forest fires, and eradication of olive groves, systemic instruments of conquest and control of the resistance. So fire was used as a weapon simultaneously as a military weapon, a technology of conquest, and an ecological assault. And this collapses the distinction between battlefield and environment, combatant and landscape. In literary representation, burned landscapes symbolize historical trauma, irreversible loss, and colonial erasure. Fire becomes both literal destruction and metaphor for the consuming logic of empire. And then I'm going to speak about another aspect, okay, as of colonial laboratory, which has made of Algeria an imperial testing ground. So French Algeria functioned as a testing ground for imperial governance, military experimentation, and environmental transformation. Colonial modernity was not exported to Algeria. It was built through colonial experimentation there. Extraction, militarization, infrastructure violence, surveillance, and ecological control were refined in Algerian soil after being deployed across the colonial world. So the colonial experiment in Algeria was not peripheral to French modernity, and this needs to be revised. It needs to be corrected. It was central to its very raison d'etre formation. The techniques of governance, ecological management, the population control developed in Algeria became templates for imperial administration worldwide. So modernity was not brought to the colony as often assumed. It was built through the colony, from the colony, through its destruction, through its rearrangement, its subordination to metropolitan imperative, the consequences of which we still suffer from till nowadays, we still live with in our contemporary times. Now, allow me to speak about one of the most nefarious aspects of French colonialism, which is not as much talked about as I hope in the historical archives, the national archives, which is occluded from historical narratives, so to speak, which is that of nuclear colonialism. Because between 1960 and 1966, France has conducted nuclear tests at different regions in the Algerian Sahara, namely at Regan and in Akkar, two cities, okay, that are in the if you say in the geographical frame of my hometown, okay, even after the formal independence of Algeria in 1962. The desert was imagined as an empty, disposable, and outside of history landscape, while in reality it was actually inhabited, not very far from where these experiments have been conducted. Okay, more than 6,000 people during the day lived and were contaminated, and the consequences of this nuclear contamination still runs across till our days. So the Algerian desert became a radioactive extension of imperial modernity. Radiation, okay, does not respect borders or timelines. The nuclear tests that were conducted produced non-human afterlives. Contamination persisted across generations, landscapes permanently altered, bodies were marked by invisible, slow violence to invoke Krupniks. And again, this proves, okay, that the continuity of the unfinished projects of empire, which still lingers in Algerian atmosphere, in Algerian land, that the testing which was conducted during the days continued long after independence was allegedly, okay, attained, and colonial ecological violence exceeds the formal timeline of empire, a key dimension of Nixon's concept of slow violence. I will share with you, here's a photo of the nuclear experiment, okay, that was conducted in 1906 called the Blue Jeruba, the first atomic bomb, which was much stronger, okay, in destructive power than that of the Second World War in Nagasaki. So near Regan in the Algerian Sahara, an event celebrated by Charles de Gaulle and French authorities as the triumph of national power and scientific progress has been conducted there. And between 1960 and 1961, France conducted 4 nuclear tests in colonial Algeria, despite the presence of thousands of inhabitants in the surrounding areas, leaving behind severe human and environmental devastation. Witnesses recalled violent tremors, enormous mushroom clouds, and landscapes scarred by radiation and extreme heat, while many residents later developed rare illnesses linked to radioactive contamination. The fire spread beyond Algeria later on, moved into several African countries, and it has sparked regional and international protests. More than 60 years later, these tests continue to symbolize the enduring legacy of colonial violence, ecological destruction, and unresolved historical justice between France and Algeria. Now, very briefly, because I cannot go through all of the literary traces of Algerian writers who have documented these or who have gone beyond the anthropocentric readings of colonial domination, I have here a number of Algerian writers who have helped transform damaged land into testimony throughout their works. The earth in Algerian literature always speaks through ruin, fire, radiation, and abandonment. Literature becomes an archive of ecological violence, preserving what official histories erase. So we have the writer Katib Yassin, who has shown throughout his works, especially in his novel Najma, that land is a historical witness. The earth remembers colonial violence even when institutions deny it. And then there is Mohammed Dib, another important writer who has shown throughout his work the extent to which rural dispossession and ecological ruptures have influenced Algeria and were rendered through intimate landscapes of loss. We also have the very canonical and famous female writer, Assia Jabbar, who has espoused, eco-critical concerns with feminist concerns or gender dimensions of colonial environmental violence, showing how women's body, alongside land, were co-sites of domination and of destruction. And we have also Boilem Sensel, who has also commented in such an incisive manner on post-independence ecological inheritance and how colonial destruction shapes the present landscape. Almost every Algerian writer, especially contemporary ones, keep going to these post-colonial concerns and problematizing the extent to which the afterlives of colonial domination are never truly gone. So here I have a number of works by the aforementioned writers, ordered chronologically. Mohammed Dib, who has shown in his novels La Grande Maison, L'Incendie, and Été Africain, who has shown famine, drought, poverty, agricultural dispossession under French colonialism, and that the Algerian landscape appears always exhausted and damaged by colonial extraction. Land and human suffering are portrayed as inseparable. And then Katib Yassin, through his novel Najma in 1956, presents Algeria as a fragmented and wounded geography. Mountains, rivers, and ruins function as mnemonic archives of colonial trauma. The fractured narrative mirrors the dismemberment of the nation under colonialism. And then Assia Jabbar, through such works as Fantasia, an Algerian cavalcade, published in 1985. She reconstructs Algeria through ruins, silences, and destroyed villages. The earth becomes an archive of massacre, of invasion, and resistance. And she links colonized land to women's bodies as spaces of occupation, rape, and violence. She has also done so in her very well-received work, Le Blanc de l'Algérie, where she explores the afterlives of colonial violence after independence and portrays Algeria as haunted by trauma, ruins, and loss. And then we have the very famous transnational writer, Yasmina Khadra, who throughout many of his works revisits colonial Algeria through dispossessed and divided landscapes, and he highlights that settler colonialism's impacts on identity, belonging, and memory, showing how colonial violence reshaped both people and territory. By way of conclusion, Let me go back once again towards the planetary ethics. Okay, that's your conference. So beautifully put forth as an essential theme or track. And then I will restate my core argument, which is that French colonialism in Algeria, and by extension, all other imperial and colonial establishments throughout the world, were never simply ecological, were never simply just colonialist projects, but were just as much ecological projects. Environmental destruction was not accidental, it was central to imperial domination, and Algerian literature preserves this memory and challenges Eurocentric narratives of progress and hence of modernity. So colonialism reshaped planetary ecology. The crisis of modernity is inseparable from the history of empire. Ecological damage persists beyond political independence. Radiation, deforestation, and desertification are non-human afterlives of colonial occupation. Reading Algerian literature ecologically means recognizing that environmental justice is inseparable from decolonization. The wounds inscribed into the land demand to recognize colonialism as an ecocide, to look at literature as an archive or as a counter-archive that registers memory against erasure, to consider the non-human afterlives that extend way beyond the official end of empire, and to look at the planetary ethics, okay, that demand for justice, for not simply for our martyrs, okay, who have so gallantly fought, okay, and sacrificed their lives, okay, in the Algerian Revolution, but also justice for this land, which still suffers the aftermath, the consequences of the destructive and brutal French tactics. Okay, I've tried to make it concise, okay, to fit within the time allotted. So thank you so much for your attention, and I am ready to receive any questions, okay, that you might have about the presentation, taking into account that the Algerian and Indian experiences are very much alike, okay, on so many levels. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Iman. And I think, as you were speaking, that we have similar experience of coloniality and colonial modernity. I was reminded of the sociologist and the thinker Bernard Cohn, who talks about the unitary field of analysis in his work on India and Britain. As you say, that colonial Algeria became a testing ground, and which is so true, from governmentality to every idea which the colonial regime perfected in colonial Algeria. I think this kind of creates the link or the connection between colonial India and colonial Algeria. And also, it's such a brilliant paper. First, it's such a brilliant paper because the way you talk about the desert as a space of theater, where the empire kind of acts out its performative modernity.
Exactly.
And it's a show of power, and it's not barren. It becomes a sort of a conveyor belt of production. So it's not only spectacle, but it also a kind of a forge or a kind of a factory house where things are being perfected, where the very physical instruments of necropolitics are born. The desert is not barren, Yes, it's where death is being generated. And also, I am very, very kind of thankful to you that you talk about ruined spaces. You talk about abandoned villages in Algerian literature, and how Algerian literature is going back to an exploration of these ruined spaces, barren villages, abandoned houses, and they are extremely mnemonic. And also they are very culturally contested, because a specific ideology works to present them as barren or unproductive. So this is a case that is very similar to India, when British painters came and showed up Indian landscape as barren, as infertile, as very resistive to all forms of governmentality. But I will kind of keep my questions for you for the latter part of the session, because we have another, and I'm sure the audience have a lot to ask, and we would move on to the next paper now. And this would be by Umar Nizaruddin. And again, and this is, I think, one of the, this kind of, takes us into a different kind of a ride. This is about Sri Lankan science fiction. And so I think, is Professor Nizaruddin here? So we can start with the last paper of the day. Dr. Bhattacharya, is Professor Nizaruddin amongst us?
Yes,
Dr. Chakraborty.
Yes. He's here, I think, isn't he?
He is there. I think then we can begin with his paper, his presentation.
I think I saw.
Professor Nizaruddin, can you hear me, please?
No, I think he has got disconnected. I don't think he's here.
Can he be contacted?
We'll try.
Okay. I think in the meantime, we can have questions from the audience.
Yes, sir. Please continue.
Yes, I think, okay, till we are able to connect. And I think if we can't find Professor Umar Nizaruddin, it would be a great loss, because we are all looking forward to this wonderful pop paper, Science Fiction, Arthur C. Clarke and Sri Lanka. Okay, in the meantime, we can take questions. Dr. Bhattacharya, Dr. Chakraborty, we can have questions for now.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I think that is good. Let's continue with the Q&A.
Yes, we are just waiting for Dr. Nizaruddin to come.
We'll just wait a few minutes then.
Yes, I think he will soon join us. Meanwhile, we can have some questions and queries, comments from the audience, and also from the participants and presenters. So,
Professor Moisa, are you with us? Can I put a few questions before you? Because since you were the first speaker,
Yes,
you can
Professor.
switch on. Yes, you can switch on your video if it's not too much of an ask.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, it's not an obligation. Okay, it's just gives us the feel of a real conference. So
Yeah.
I was wondering, since you talked about digital platforms as a very relevant and appropriate way to showcase decent and the lived condition of the Palestinians. I was just wondering whether this form of address, or this is a very innovative and artistic form, the use of digital platforms to kind of to expose the kind of lived reality they are going through. Could you just talk to us a bit about the pitfalls of such an appropriation of digitized platforms? Are there certain disadvantages that you find that when a particular form of descent, when a particular form of life needs to express itself, and that too through a series of operations that to a large extent is based on the capital from the West, or upgradations from the West, or technological innovations from the West? So do you see it as a kind of a strategic move, or do you see it as a kind of a compromise of the Palestinian reality?
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, for your question, and this is in fact the question that I have started my presentation. With. If you remember, I said that whether the digital platforms that we are. Yes, we do have access to today. Are they really used as means of representation only? Right? Do they represent reality? Because that's the issue in the modern era is the issue of representation. Who is representing whom exactly and what to represent? But we are not really aware of the ideologies right? And the ideas that are really governing or structuring these kind of platforms. And I have used, I mean, a work in which he said, I mean, the author said that, in fact, when we say media, meaning we are talking about, it's used as an ideological apparatus. It is used for sure, and this is the point that I have said, that it's thanks to these platforms we are connected, we have access to what is going on, I mean, in Palestine. So what is going on in Palestine today, right, is access to everyone. So through I mean, TikTok, through the hashtags and the live streams and etc., the videos, the smartphones, right? So we know what is going on. So what is going on in Gaza is no longer confined, I mean, to that territory only. But on the other hand, right, we may neglect the fact that, I mean, these ideologies, unfortunately, they are guided and they are controlled by certain ideologies. And the thing that I have noticed also here is that they enable us, they grant us, I mean, visibility, but unfortunately they use, I mean, what is going on in Gaza as a commodity. And algorithms, right, we know that they do really focus on engagement. They often amplify the emotional charged contents, and we all know this, right? While unfortunately they made us, right, turn into a society of spectacles only, in which the social reality becomes really mediated, circulated via these platforms, and we neglect, unfortunately, the fact to engage critically with what is going on. We neglect that there are certain, I mean, ideologies behind. We have historical events that are going on over there, right? We have, I mean, there is a political agenda, right, that is controlling what is going on. So we focus only on the event, right? We focus on the representation. So going back, we are going to go back to the starting point. So we focus on facts only, but we do neglect, I mean, to dig deeper into the origins and the intentions of these facts.
Okay, right. So again, a kind of an unfinished chapter, I think, in this area of contestation, because as you spoke, I was reminded of Baudrillard's The Gulf War Did Not Take Place, where he talks again about the you know, the relentless simulated mediation, the kind of spectacle that goes on, and in the course of that simulated mediation, the original event is lost. So I was wondering that whether the victim or the stakeholder can recognize that the event, the point of origin, gets reproduced so many times in this mediated atmosphere that the kind of immediacy you were talking about in your presentation, and which was extremely relevant and critical, because it directly spoke about the lived reality. Lived reality is intuitive. Lived reality is visceral. So maybe maybe we need to also find a way where this belt, this series, this network of relentless mediation, whether this is possible presently, I really have no answer. You might provide us a few clues as to that. But where across this region, this territory of relentless mediation, you know, the event could be somehow be possessed, could be reconfigured, could be touched. You know, I'm talking about impossibilities here, but thank you so much for kind of, you know, raking these issues up, because I was so much reminded of The Gulf War Did Not Take Place as I was kind of listening.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, yeah, I mean, the idea of the visual content, we focus on the visual content, what is represented, what is reproduced, like you have said. Unfortunately, yes, we lost, I mean, this chance, I mean, to have access to what happened exactly as it is. So here we are dealing just with other, I mean, representations, probably. They could probably will never give us, I mean, a detailed image on what was going on exactly. But as I have focus on the whole picture, so we are not really busy, right? I mean, busy with I mean, the certain details that we do really miss as individuals in the digital era. And this is what I have mentioned at the very beginning. I mean, the philosophy said that again, we are trapped into this fatal, right, ideas that we focus on what happened exactly, but we do not really focus on the different ideologies, the different political and even I mean cultural and even social, if not to say the philosophical, yes, underpinnings that structure, I mean, the images that we see, I mean, directly live via the digital platforms.
Okay, I think Professor Iman has a question. There is a raised hand.
Hello, yes, it's again to myself, Tom. Okay, thank you for your insightful presentation. It's just a follow-up on what you've been saying, okay, concerning the extent to which recovering the actual event or the original event is becoming more and more of an impossible mission. And I believe, Tom, and we have gone through this, okay, that this has been further aggravated by the advancements in AI, because all of these access to videos, and we can no longer tell, okay, which is the version that's actually happening, and with the atrocities that have been committed in Gaza as of lately, and which are still ongoing. Okay, it has become nearly impossible to tell which mediation stands for the actual real event. Okay, so while social media has played a major role, okay, I think that the AI advancements have further complicated and problematized access to any true version. I still remember when I have friends in Palestine, okay, and where and even during certain events in Egypt, okay, when I hear of certain bombardments or certain things, okay, and I reach out to my colleagues or friends, okay, and they reassure me that no such thing has happened, that the image, okay, that you see, or the videos that have been portrayed to you kind of portray only a partial image of what's actually happening. The same thing that happened lately in Qatar with all of the events, okay, surrounding the bombardments in Qatar. Okay, friends say that whatever we are receiving as representation, okay, is only a partial image of the actual events happening. So they have, yes, played an important role, but have made it really different for us as perceivers to tell which is which stands for the true event, from which stands from the interpretation or from a mediated event. Yes.
Right. If I could just bring Professor Agabu into this conversation. Yes. Professor, can you hear us?
Yes, of course.
Okay, I was just wondering, because in your paper you talked about the attempt at realism by African American writers. I was just wondering that whether is it possible to see this as a kind of a compromise for the African American spiritual life? Is a realistic representation is the only way for the African American life to be narrativized? Are there other ways to talk about this? This is a very structural and a question based on narratives. So if you could just shed some light on it.
Yes, my pleasure. Yes, this has always been a controversial issue in African American literature, either to use it as a pure weapon to voice the voiceless in their experience, or should it challenge this very realistic and not make of literature or African American literature as a social document. And this has been debated over centuries. But we cannot deny the fact that the condition of African Americans is really unique. So at a given moment, especially with the very early slave narratives, where people were not yet allowed education, and it was something that was just luxury for them at the time. So they couldn't provide us with pieces of literature that meet, let's say, the white hegemonic standards of great works of art. So they were just penning their experiences and, under which conditions at the time. Okay, if a slave was discovered writing something or penning something, he would be directly killed. So they were just trying to provide their own version of history. They tried their best to provide us with a counter narrative to what has been, written by whites at the time. Later on, with the historical evolution of the nation, with the abolishment of slavery, with the civil rights movement, where some African Americans could afford a certain level of education, then they tried to challenge, the white hegemonic literature by constantly showing that we are blacks and we're able to write, good pieces of art. And this was the challenge after all, but it was not easy because people did not agree on the function of literature, the nature of literature itself. So that's why we have two different or sometimes divergent views about what should an African American write. We see here a whole evolution of literature, starting from the very early slave narratives to the very first literary works, like, for example, the crucial differences between Richard Wright's stances and Ralph Ellison's stances later on, who is labeled the title of the Black Joyce, wway he tried to show that I'm not like Richard Wright after all. If you criticize them on or you said that Richard Wright was too bold in portraying the or reinforcing stereotypes about African Americans by portraying Bigger Thomas as the savage black, the black rapist, then I will take literature to another dimension, relying on highly modernist techniques, challenging works by Joyce and by very, very eminent white modernist writers, and he took literature to a completely different dimension till we reach Toni Morrison, the Nobel Prize winner, and my doctoral thesis tackled how she relied on how she relied on paradox and ambiguity in portraying the very condition of African American women. So here we see with Beloved, with magic realism, with highly sophisticated postmodern techniques, how she could successfully voice the unspeakable, as she used in her own literary criticism in her village literature, how she voiced the voiceless in the lives of African American women, and how she provided a completely challenging and complex perspective on the condition of the African American woman, and we see the condition of Sagar in Beloved, and how the notion of infanticide or violence is given completely multi-layered and multifaceted dimensions. So when the extreme act of motherhood is expressed through extreme forms of violence. So I think that we should not, or we should applaud for the African American struggle for survival on all levels, and we should appreciate all the efforts that have been made by African American writers to portray this struggle, a struggle that was on many interconnected levels, on the level of social level, on the so they were struggling for survival against slavery and later on segregation, racial violence, poverty, exclusion, alienation, and their struggle for identity and dignity.
Yes, Professor, I think Dr. Fatum has a question for you here.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Professor
in fact,
Fatum,
not really addressed
a...
for Dr. Huriya, but just I wanted to add something to the comment that is given to me by Dr. Iman Ben Khalifa. Yes, when she talked about the age of AI and etc. So going back to the question that was given to me by Professor Sagar, right? So since you said that, are we really able, to access to reality nowadays? For sure, yes. Dr. Iman said that with the rise of the artificial intelligence, we unfortunately lost this chance of having a real image vis-a-vis reality. And this idea, in fact, was predicted by the philosopher Baudrillard, like you mentioned before. So we are no longer able, to differentiate, between what is real and what is artificial or what is mediated. And in fact, we as observers, we got exhausted. I guess, from distinguishing, from having this burden or this task, to differentiate between what actually happened, right, and what is really fabricated.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we have a question from the audience as well. Swastik, you can go ahead with your question, and please mention whom you want the question to be addressed by. Swastik.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
It's a general question that I want to ask, that if we are trying to have a brief intellectual backbone of modernity in colonial discourses, must have to be either anti-colonial, something that we known as internationalist perspective, without the something we call as the concept of nation in ourselves. Then if we don't have the concept of nation within ourselves, if we don't have something called nationalist perspective, then someone who is a stranger to a particular land, we are not able to fight against them. Then practically this internationalist perspective is already a failure. Then what is the praxis behind the claim that we are emerging globally with all the boundaries we have?
Okay, Swastik, thank you for the question. Professors, I think it's up to you, all of you, to kind of, whether you would be willing to address this, because this is, I think this is a question that again kind of brings us back to the origin of things, I guess, to a very historiographic and a structural understanding of what we have been doing. So I think if any of you could kind of, speak about this a bit from your own perspective. Professor Iman, if you may.
Yes, sure. I was listening to my fellow colleague here, okay, and I was remembering a quote by Franz Fanon, okay, who says that each generation must discover its own mission, fulfill it or betray it, okay, in the rest of the earth.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we need to be doing face we cannot possibly conduct a decolonial project without knowing what is it exactly we are trying to reverse or to conduct this decolonial project upon. Okay, so you spoke about nationalism and of the necessity of having a full fully grounded sense of nationalism in order to conduct decolonial missions. Okay, I couldn't agree more, and I think that this aligns very well with the very call, okay, of this conference, that of negotiating and reversing the made universal kind of template, okay, that we all need to adhere to. Because in Algeria recently, okay, there have been many endeavors, okay, in different sectors in higher education to reverse these kind of hierarchies that that try to impose certain universal made kind of templates or even syllabi or programs upon Algerian universities. So yes, I think that's resorting once again to that sense of nationalism and discovering our mission, okay, to begin with, what is it exactly we seek to decolonize, okay, is always an overdue and a necessary task. Okay, like I've said, many Algerian scholars are nowadays contesting the very Eurocentric ideas of teaching, for example, African American literature alone, or for example, American literature or British literature alone, and are more in favor of a paradigm that is global, okay, for example, world literature. This is just to give an example of a pedagogical mission, so to speak, in Algerian universities, which attempt to contest and negotiate these made universal or made indispensable kind of templates upon everyone. So yes.
Thank you so much. I think you have taken us to the absolutely the of finding the true relevance, and I think every decade makes its own relevance.
Exactly.
What to unearth and why. Thank you, Swastik, and I think we have maybe a few parting words from Dr. Bhattacharya. It has been an extremely fruitful session, and not just for the sake of it. I myself could say that I have been enriched. All the speakers have provided excellent reading lists for us, for our students, for the generation which is waiting in the wings. And as usual, Dr. Chakraborty here, Dr. Bhattacharya, they have been carrying the day through. And we have another day tomorrow, I guess. Wonderful line of speakers. And it's really a tragedy that we couldn't have Professor Nizaruddin amongst us. Maybe I only hope he is safe. And and I leave the mic to Anirban for the last few words for the day. I think it has been a fruitful day.
Thank you, Professor Sagar Taranga Mondal. This has been a very, very enriching, enlightening, brilliant session. Very interesting, and very provocative. So thank you for chairing this session and fine-tuning it with very interesting, insightful, brilliant interventions, deliberations, and discussions. And thank you all the presenters from different quarters of the world. So welcome and thank you to this platform. And Amrita, can you contact with Professor Nizaruddin?
No, I was not able to get in touch with him. I think it's a timing issue, more of a. Let's see if we can get hold of him. Then we can place him somewhere tomorrow if he's interested in presenting this. Yes.
He has been there throughout the sessions.
Yes, I'll try. Yes, I'll try and get in touch with him today.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And
Thank you so much.
Go on to next day. Tomorrow we'll have 2 plenary lectures by Professor Shumona Roy and then by Professor Shuhin Bhattacharya. So we'll be meeting you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. See you.
Thank you so much for being here with us. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for the opportunity. Salam.